So you think you can't build a championship roster around Scottie Barnes? Is that the charge? Let me prove you can. Now, this is going to be very good news for Toronto Raptor fans who maybe are a little bit concerned that you've invested a super max or a max contract into a player that is so difficult to build around. I'm going to show you how realistically and easily you could build around a player like Scottie Barnes, who has considerable and immense strengths as a basketball player. I'll also show you why maybe this is not the greatest thing in the world to discover, because you're going to see through the course of my revelation of this roster around Scottie, this beautiful 12-man roster around Scottie Barnes, that the Toronto Raptors have missed a lot of opportunities to add exactly the players I'm going to talk about, or players who are very similar to the players I talked about. So shout outs to all of you. Shout outs to our community members. Shout outs to our subscribers. If you're not subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so. And also, if you are a member, I dropped a absolute banger yesterday. This video took me so long to make. It's longer than I've probably taken for a video in a really long time. It's been released for members only. I want to thank our members who have supported our goal towards 100 members by September 16th. So I wanted to pay thanks to you guys. So it's a cool one, and give me a W in the chat if you've seen it, or give me a W later on if you've seen it. But it basically breaks down to 9 basketball levels of IQ, and I think that is going to be shout outs to Tetrahedragon saying watched it. Shout outs to you. A lot of people did watch it. Some people did call it our best video ever. So thank you to all of you who watched it. It's a 10-minute video that breaks down levels of basketball IQ, going right from the people you play with to the people you watch play to the people they build legends about. And it's interesting, and I think that it will serve to be an interesting one. There's also another video coming out this week, the Toronto Raptors 2025-2026 preview. I'm going to be putting a lot of work into that. Every spare hour right now is going towards creation, scripting. I'm really trying to take a next step as a content creator, so I thank you all for joining this journey. Okay, building around this guy. Strengths, weaknesses. Look, if I told you 2 years ago that you could build a finals roster around Tyrese Halliburton, you would think I was crazy. And the truth is that there have been players who are Scottie Barnes adjacent as talent level players like Rasheed Wallace, players like Chris Webber. I mean, I'm certainly not comparing Scottie to LeBron James and Michael Jordan, but you get my point, right? Like there's a level down below Giannis, and I think a lot of people, even Scottie's biggest detractors, see a pathway for him to get there. But the difference between the Raptors and the Pacers in terms of building around their best player is, I think the Pacers did a very good job of complementing their best player's skills, where I think the Raptors have done maybe a poor job of doing that over the last 4 years. So through this roster, I'm going to explain basically why I think this is the perfect 12-man roster around Scottie, which players on the current roster might maybe mirror some of the elements of these players. I didn't care about which players are actually on this team. I didn't automatically put Brandon Ingram and Ochai Agbaji on this team. Also, I did just invest in a copy of NBA 2K26. This is the earliest I've bought 2K in about 10 years. So usually I wait for Black Friday for the price to half. But I actually did something similar, whereas I played out 2 years of the Raptors season. That video will also drop this week, where I played out 2 seasons as the Toronto Raptors, and I actually fulfilled on some of the promise of this video. So let's start, without further ado, we're almost 4 minutes in. Let's start with the deep bench, because I think this is important for roster building. If you look at championship teams, they're often very veteran-laden or specific role-laden in the roster spots 9 to 12. And good news, the first and only Toronto Raptor that exists on this team, that exists on my hypothetical team, is Jacoby Walter. But there's 2 other players, and I think they are just optimal bigs. Now, there's a bunch of bigs on this that are going to come up. There's 4 bigs, specifically big bigs, that are going to come up, and they're all very different. And I'll start with Al Horford. I think Al Horford has been consistently, since his days in Florida, just a very understated, underrated player. Obviously, later in his career right now, he is in the I'm going to sign for a veteran minimum or a $3-4 million deal part, but I think his synergy with Scottie would just be so perfect. His defensive awareness, his high IQ, his capable shooting, his ability to set screens. He's just the type of big that Scottie has never had. And I think the best big that Scottie's ever played with really is Jakob Poeltl. He's the best big we've seen in Toronto in a really long time, and that's just partially because he's a good play finisher. Last year, Scottie was second or third in potential assists, and that tells me that he's a really good creator of offense within reason, within limits. Obviously, there are isolation, handle, etc. limits, but it also tells me that he's surrounded by a lot of poor finishers. And Hal Horford is, if nothing else, a really good finisher. He is a good finisher, and I think that he can stretch the floor out. And he's not at a place right now where he can load up like 25, 30 minutes a night. So having him in place of, say, someone like a Jonathan Mobo would go a really, really long way towards complementing in case of injuries to the further rotation. Jacoby is on this team by virtue of the fact that I think he is just a perfect synergistic fit with Scottie, and he's a good shooter. Last year, after the first cold 6 games where he was recovering from the shoulder, he shot almost 40%, and 38 to 40% for the rest of the season. He had some very hot stretches. There was a point where he was almost automatic. His point of attack defense, apart from screen navigation, is very good. And then, I just think his potential for growth, his really interesting high basketball IQ, his athleticism, his propensity to attack the rim, how I think all of that will progress now with more strength. I think Jacoby is just a really great fit with Scottie Barnes. And then we have Jalen Williams, the virtual human victory cigar for the OKC Thunder, who, by the way, the Raptors missed on by one pick in 2022 or 2022. And that was the year that the Raptors drafted Christian Koloko. And Jalen Williams is just very underrated, man. You're going to see a lot of underrated players coming up in this discussion, but Jalen Williams was a second-round pick. This was perfectly acquirable for the Raptors. I mean, again, Horford is a veteran minimum guy right now. Maybe you offer him a little bit more than the veteran minimum. If you don't make the Brandon Ingram deal, don't, maybe make the Jakob Poeltl deal. There's a lot of, what ifism in terms of how you could potentially acquire an Al Horford. But I think at this point, because his contract value is so low, you could definitely offer him a little bit of a cushy, situation. And if you had a contender, I think he would be more open to accepting the Raptors offer, provided he and his family had no issues playing in Toronto. But Jalen Williams is a perfectly good example of a player that you totally missed on in the draft. And yeah, he was right there, man. He was right there. So you don't make that deal for Thaddeus Young. You have either Jalen Williams or Walker Kessler, both of whom I think have good synergistic fit with Scottie. Jalen is a really decent defender. Like, he's not a bad defender, and I think that's going to be the hallmark of all these players. Is we're not taking anyone who is unplayable defensively. So there's no Grady Dix on this roster. There are also no Chris Bouchers on this roster or Precious Achua's on this roster, which is to say, if I go back to this video specifically, there's nobody who's not at least bordering on surgeon basketball IQ. Like, we are going for really high IQ basketball players, and that's where we got to be. We got to be low-level surgeons, high-level surgeons, to extremely good rotation pieces that just simply understand their role. And I think that Jalen Williams fits that to a T. He's obviously operated as an occasional starter. He's totally egoless in terms of his ability to come off the bench and still provide value. He's a guy you cannot play in the first half, play in the second half, and he spaces the floor. And he's turned into a really good shooter. And it's weird because, he's playing behind Chet, and he's playing behind Isaiah Hartenstein, and he's playing behind some small ball wings who can occasionally play up with the way OKC plays defense. He may not be the best fit for them, but he would be the best backup big that the Raptors have had in forever. And it's almost an embarrassment of riches that he often was like out of the rotation for OKC last year. So that's where I would be with the deep bench. Now, for context, the optimized version of Jacoby, Jalen Williams, and Al Horford, even in his current state, probably would have been like really key rotation players for the Raptors last year. And I think that alone shows you the gap. Jalen Williams and Al Horford are at the very end of my bench, and they are considerably better than Colin Castleton, Jonathan Mobo, no offense, also Orlando Robinson, all these guys that the Raptors were playing. They're good players. These are all good players. There's no bad players here. The bad players are like roster spots like 16, 17, whatever. I don't care. You got Elijah Martin, Chucky Hepburn, Christian Koloko, over Shamshi, Jonathan Mobo. I don't care if those guys, Garrett Temple, I don't care if those guys are there. But in terms of like rotation pieces to maximize Scottie, I think this is the bare minimum that you got to be in terms of talent, right? Let's go to key rotation. Now, these three players would have all started for the Raptors last year, and this is where you're going to see depth, right? And once again, three players that could have easily been acquired by the Toronto Raptors had they actually thought to do so. Tamani Kamara was a late second round pick. He was picked in the 50s. I think he was a 52nd pick. Cason Wallace went a few picks before Grady Dick. Again, the consequence of trying to make the play in the year that they traded for Jakob Pertl is that you don't have a chance to draft a guy like Cason Wallace, whose synergistic fit with Scottie Barnes is just so incredible. Now, if those of you who follow my draft coverage know that I was super high on Cason very, very, very early in the draft process that year. There were mock drafts putting him around 20, 22, 23, etc. And I was like, no, 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 no. I would take this guy top 12. I would take him top 13. Now, I never got as high as like top 5, top 6 on him because I had some concerns about his creation ability. But this is just about as perfect a role player as you can put on the bench behind Scottie Barnes. And the crazy thing is, he's probably a better player than most of the players you started last year. Tamani Kamara, same thing, man. Tamani is an amazing young player. And again, picked in the 50s, totally could have gotten him, missed him. And it's like, how do you miss him? How is it that with all the prioritization towards foreign players, towards long wings, how is it that all the investment that we made from Precious Achiuwa, Thaddeus Young, Otto Porter, how is it that you missed a clear window to draft guys like Herb Jones and Tamani Kamara when they were sitting there for you in the second round? Again, this is where you try to ask yourself, did the Raptors really slip in their drafting and scouting abilities? Because these are the types of players you always got in the mid 2010s, and these are just the players you don't find anymore. Daniel Gafford, again, he was available for a first round pick. You traded a first round pick for Thaddeus Young. You could have easily traded one for Daniel Gafford. I think a couple of seconds probably would have moved Washington off of it. I'll reference that old quote from Daryl Morey. At any given time, there's usually like the best way to do business in the NBA is when 6 or 7 teams don't know what they're doing. There was a period of time where the Washington Wizards really didn't know what they were doing. They traded away Kristaps Porzingis for peanuts. They traded away Daniel Gafford for peanuts. They traded away Denny Avdia for peanuts. And the Raptors weren't able to maximize on any of it. And at the time, if you remember, when I was making mock trades for Pascal Siakam, very many of the players that I was like mocking to the Raptors, like, this is a great trade for Siakam. This is a great trade for Siakam. There was one deal which included Kristaps Porzingis. There was a deal that included a player that we're going to talk about. Kristaps Porzingis. There was a deal that included Daniel Gafford. There was a deal that included Dyson Daniels plus Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, one of those packages. And again, it takes two to tango. The Raptors didn't want to deal with a team that Pascal didn't want to go to, but this is the type of player that you really need next to Scottie Barnes. Tumani is an elite defender, as evidenced by the fact that he made an all-defensive team last year. I think he is progressing slowly into being a solid two-way player in the mold of OG Anunoby. He has great positional versatility. And oftentimes last year when I watched the Raptors defense, the only thing I think of is this defense needs another Scottie Barnes. And I'm going to replicate Scottie's defensive aggression and tools a couple times on this roster, and this is one of them. This is a player who can easily come off the bench and play 20 minutes. There's also a player who, if one of your starters, because you have a couple of major injury concerns in your starting lineup, which is why I need all this depth behind him, he could easily play spot starter. He's a growing three-point shooter. Gafford is just the type of rim pressure athlete, rim protector you just don't have. And I think, again, I look at those potential assists for Scottie Barnes, and I'm like, how many more assists does he get if he's passing the ball to Daniel Gafford instead of Kem Birch or Precious Achiuwa or Chris Boucher? Because Gafford is just such a dominant finisher, and it doesn't take a lot to create separation when you've got two big players like Scottie and Daniel Gafford in a pick and roll. So I just think that he's great. And then obviously Cason Wallace, he compensates so much for Scottie's point of attack struggles. He's a great defensive event creator. I think he's a bit of an underrated shooter who had a bit of a down year last year. But granted, if you can reduce the complexity of his three-point shooting, he's certainly not a player you can completely ignore. So this is my bench. You'll see there's no Peyton Pritchard. There's no, all-stars lining the bench. I think when a lot of people, when they do these types of exercises, where they try to build like a perfect roster around a player, they'll often go into trying to take a whole bunch of all-stars and putting them together. That's not really what I've done here. None of the players that I've selected here were all-stars last year. None of the players that I've selected here were all NBA players last year, but I'll show you how they fit perfectly with Scottie Barnes. Okay, now this is the best player on my team apart from Scottie, and he's a little bit controversial, but he was available. and he was dumped by the Brooklyn Nets when the Raptors were aggressively looking to get better. And I think this was a major missed opportunity because I can think of no better star to put next to Scottie Barnes than Kyrie Irving. Now, Kyrie is an incredibly intelligent, good shooter. He's one of the greatest shooters in NBA history, and I don't think he gets enough credit for it. He's a great ball handler, great manipulator, great positional. He can participate positionally. He has championship experience. He has big game experience. He's a clutch closer. I just think sometimes the off court stuff with Kyrie overcomplicates how people feel about him. And James saying Kyrie is so underrated. I completely agree with you. Kyrie Irving is insanely underrated. And Kyrie has just this immense ability to bend defenses in a way Scottie simply can't. He is, in a lot of ways, the anti Scottie Barnes. Like, he is extremely shifty with his dribble. He's extremely efficient with his pick and roll possessions. He's great off the ball, too. He has experience playing next to a jumbo creator like LeBron James, Luka Doncic. So he has like the perfect moldability with Scottie. And in fact, if you want to think about it, this is exactly the type of player that is stopping. Not having this type of player is exactly what's stopping you from being a contender right now. Which is to say, if you can drop a perfectly healthy Kyrie Irving on this team right now and Emmanuel quickly moves to the bench, you're a contender in the East right away. That's the gap. That's this guy right here. He's this good, and he can drive offenses. He's not a tier one superstar. He's not Luka Doncic. He's not Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but he does those types of things. He is great in the paint. He is just a phenomenal manipulator of the game, and he would get Scottie easy buckets, but he would also benefit off of some of Scottie's gravity as a driver and as a post player. I think he'd play perfectly off of him. So this is the best player on your team apart from Scottie. And as you can see, he didn't make All NBA last year. He wasn't an All NBA caliber player last year. So no, you don't need LeBron James in his prime or Giannis Antetokounmpo next to a Scottie Barnes to elevate the championships. You just need a really smart roster, and that smart roster includes one of my favorite players in the league, Derek White, a player who, by the way, the Spurs eventually ended up moving for 2 first-round picks. You also made trades with the San Antonio Spurs, the very same San Antonio Spurs who had Derek White. You made a trade for Thaddeus Young, in which you gave up a first-round pick. You made a trade for Jakob Poeltl, in which you gave up a first-round pick, which turned out to be a lottery pick, highly valuable, and multiple seconds. So why can't you take all of that stuff you gave them for Thaddeus Young and Jakob Poeltl and instead trade for, I don't know, Derek White? Now, Derek White wasn't the greatest shooter in the world, in San Antonio, but he got to Boston and just unleashed them. I think Derek White is exactly the type of guard that Darko has worked with and had a lot of success with. He has a lot in common. He is also an incredibly positionally versatile defender. He can guard down about 2 positions. He can guard up a position. He's amazing, and he is really reasonably priced. The Raptors allegedly were interested in trading for Derek White this offseason, but apparently the price was too high. And I don't really know this idea of the Raptors where they just want to give up one first round pick instead of just giving up 2 for the right player is sort of a big sticking point for me. Like, you gave up 1 to get Brandon Ingram, who I think fits, by the way, but will not make this team. You gave up 1 for Thaddeus Young, who again at the time I thought fit, and Jakob Poeltl, who I think the timing was terrible, but he does fit. Like, he's a good finisher, he's a decent rim protector, he's a massive upgrade over Ken Birch. I get it, but trading 2 to get someone like a Derek White made a little bit more sense to me. And Derek White at the time I think was 27 or 28 years old, so it was still perfectly reasonable to suggest that with the way his game was going, low mileage, great, athlete, not a huge injury history. I think Derek White is the type of player who could have aged very well with Scottie in an off-ball role, and also just the type of player who can pinch into the point of attack stuff that Scottie struggles with so much. So between Derek White and also Case and Wallace, you have 2 dominant point of attack defenders you can often use together. And I think Scottie is so versatile that he can either play the 3, the 4, or sometimes even the 5, in some of these lineups, and you can still keep the tenets of a top 3 defense. And this team, make no mistake about it, would be a top 3 defense in no short part due to the power forward and center of my lineup. And the power forward, get ready, your heart to drop, because you had this player. You had this player and you traded away this player. And I think he's the perfect power forward next to Scottie Barnes. He and Scottie had a lot of great synergistic, overlaps. And, sometimes you think last year with how great Scottie became defensively, finishing top 15 in defensive EPM, and you think about it and you're like, OG Anunoby is literally like having two Scottie Barnes on defense. Different types of defenders, sure, different strengths, different weaknesses, but having two of them on the court, putting them both on the same side can shut down just about any star in the world. There's not a single star that can score on the side of the court that both these two guys fully locked in are on, which is a major cheat code if you're talking about building a contender. Now, again, OG is not a player that you need really any introduction to. You watched him for years, and he participated in some of the best teams ever assembled on this team. In fact, when he stepped in for Kawhi Leonard, when he stepped in for Kawhi Leonard in the season after Kawhi left, the Raptors were on track to win more games. They had a better defense. And that's largely because Kawhi is a very overrated defender later into his career, right? Shout outs to Red Salute for becoming a member. We are now 21 members away from hitting our goal of 100. I got news for you. Actually, I will announce this news in more detail in my next live. But if we do manage to hit 100 members, and I do maximize on this deal from YouTube to get $30 per new member, we will do a giveaway. It'll be a raffle. It'll be live on air where we will raffle off one copy of NBA 2K26. And also, this was a gift that was given to me generously by one of our channel members, which I was not able to give out fully at Penn Dance last year. They are the most beautiful handmade coasters. And we have 4 coasters for giveaway, and they will be also raffle drawn to any new members that any of the 100 plus members that we get at that time. And that pool will be randomly drawn, and one is of Grady Dick, one is of Jacoby Walter, one is of the PENSARE Basketball logo, and one is of the Raptors logo. So these 4 coasters, which are perfectly handcrafted and beautifully made by Jonathan, who is actually one of our members, so I hope he doesn't win his own coaster back, as well as a copy of NBA 2K26. So that's my way of giving back to the community that has given me so much. So this is our power forward. You know him, you love him. He's one of my favorite Raptors of all time. And here comes the center. Now, this one should be heartbreaking a little bit for Toronto Raptor fans, man, because you did have a chance to get this guy, not once, but twice. He was given away by Washington, right? And I pointed out in Washington that he had turned a major corner defensively. He is one of the best rim protectors in the league. He is one of the 3 to 4 best big man shooters in the league. And yeah, there's been some injury concerns, but that's why you have, Daniel Gafford. That's why you have Jalen Williams and Al Horford behind him, because a fully healthy, fully optimized Kristaps Porzingis is the best center in the league to put next to a Scottie Barnes. Now, we obviously need to talk about, there are holes with Porzingis. He's not the greatest in space, but he has tremendous length. And he's not going to be put in a position with space because he has this dude and this dude next to him. So this type of defense, can you just imagine? I want you to think about this team. I really want you to think about this team in full. And just give me 1 second. I'll load this image up for you. These are the starters I'm talking about. This is my starting lineup. This is my bench. This is my rotation. Tell me this team would not compete with the Cleveland Cavaliers for the best record in the East. Tell me this team can't win a championship. Tell me this team isn't better than the Indiana Pacers. Now tell me who is the superstar of this team. I mean, Kyrie Irving is superstar adjacent. Scottie Barnes can be the best player on a championship team. You just need to put the right team next to him. And I think that this is the most important thing that I want to bring up to people is today I watched a video by No Ceilings NBA, which is, a channel that I've shown a lot of love to. So nothing against them here. And one of the key members of that organization was on, and they were redrafting the 2021 draft, and they took Scottie ninth. I'll say that again. They redrafted the 2021 NBA draft, and they took Scottie fucking Barnes ninth. They took him behind Alperen Sengun. They took him behind Austin Reeves. They took him behind Jalen Suggs. The analytics are not lying to you. Scottie is really one of the best players in the league. I think the problem with the image around it is he's the best player on a 30-win team. How good could he possibly be? Doesn't completely understand the ceiling raising component of a Scottie Barnes. Now, yesterday on the panel, we had a beautiful discussion about the merits of ceiling raising versus floor raising. And I want to explain to you the difference between those two. For the rest of this live, I want to explain why I think ceiling raisers are so criminally underrated, why some of them end up in the wrong situations and never really get to shine out, why I think the greatest player of all time is, in fact, the best ceiling raiser of all time, which is Michael Jordan, and why I'm not necessarily convinced that Scottie's inability to floor raise, lineup switch feature Orlando Robinson and AJ Lawson is necessarily a detriment or a death sentence for him. So look at this lineup, right? You have really competent NBA players, with high basketball IQ, high skill. You also have 4 players who can shoot. What's the best way to maximize Scottie Barnes? Well, there are limitations, but every superstar not named LeBron James and Michael Jordan had limitations. Every one of them. Some of them aren't the greatest passers. Some of them aren't the greatest shooters. Some of them aren't the greatest defenders. Tyrese Halliburton has considerable limitations. Why is it that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is not the greatest processor of the court? He is not the greatest passer. He's not the passer that Scottie is, in my opinion. He's not the defender Scottie is, in my opinion. So why is the Thunder are able to build a optimal championship level, dynasty level offense and defense around him? Well, it helps to have Chet. It helps to have J-Dub. It helps to have the types of players they have off the bench. It helps to have Alex Caruso. Alex Caruso, by my estimation last year, would have been Scottie Barnes' best teammate. It's not a joke. I really do believe last year he was better than Emmanuel Quickley or RJ Barrett or Jakob Poeltl. And he came off the bench for the Thunder. I think there's a gaping, huge hole in talent level between roster constructions, right? You look at a Pascal Siakam, fully realized Pascal Siakam is the best player Scottie's ever played with, but he never really played with fully realized Siakam when he was fully realized. And I don't think Scottie's fully realized. I think Scottie is on the verge of taking a major jump. Now, this is fantasy. Okay, this roster is inconceivable right now. Kristaps plays for the Hawks. They believe themselves to be a contender in the East. Derek White, apparently the asking price is too high, but he might be available. Kyrie is a foundational piece of what the Dallas Mavericks are trying to do, and he is no longer available because you could have traded for him when the Nets were dangling him, when he was a quote-unquote headache, but now you probably can't trade for him because he's foundational piece for Dallas. And obviously, Derek, OG Anunoby is, the $40 million man in New York, and they're not going to trade him back to you. So you've missed the boat. But that doesn't mean that you can't mimic some of these players, because Kyrie is not a one of one. I mean, his specific skill set is one of one, but that doesn't mean you can't mimic some of what Kyrie does and put it into the Raptors. And I think you've done just that with a bigger player, not quite Kyrie, but there's Kyrie elements to Brandon Ingram. So I think Ingram fits here. While he's not the perfect forward next to Scottie, I think that's OG, he's perfectly fine if you can now replicate what OG does in your point guard spot, which you can't with Emmanuel Quickley. And if you can replicate what Derek White does in your 2-guard spot, which you can't with Grady Dick or RJ Barrett. And if you can replicate what Kristaps Porzingis does in your center spot, which, again, you can't with any of the centers on your current roster. So it's a little bit of a, okay, I can totally build a championship roster if you give me 2 static, positions, which is Scottie and Ingram. Now say, okay, fill out the other 10 spots. I can easily do that. The problem is when you start complicating it by adding Jakob, RJ, IQ into it, now the pathway becomes a lot more narrow and a lot harder. There's reasons for this. Let's factor in Scottie's weaknesses as a player, right? The ability to floor raise. Super, super weak lineups. They've been trying it for years. They've been trying since his All-Star season. They tried to run him out there with Malachi Flynn, Precious Achua, Chris Boucher, and say, okay, go carry the offense, man. And time again, it's not great. It's not efficient. It's not, because he doesn't have the skill set to do it. Cade Cunningham couldn't lift the Pistons out of losing 28 games in a row. And Cade is a lot more skilled than Scottie. I don't think he's better than Scottie, but I think he's more skilled than Scottie. Franz is a better driver than Scottie. I don't think Franz has had a tremendous amount of luck with completely defunct lineups, but the version of defunct lineups that these guys play with is totally different. Like there's different levels of defunct. The players that I've described, some of the lineups that Scottie played with, I want you to consider this. Malachi Flynn, Precious Achua. These guys are out of the league, man. Gary Trent, minimum. Chris Boucher, minimum. The league is telling you what they feel about Scottie's teammates. And the ability to put, like, I think the conundrum here is nobody else is really held to the same standard for some reason because nobody is really looking at Scottie as like, oh man, he really needs better teammates. I rarely ever hear that because I don't think people necessarily view him as a franchise savior, franchise player, de facto star. But if Luka Doncic was being asked, or if LeBron was being asked to carry 4 soon to be minimum or out of the league players, like a lineup of Bronny James adjacent players, like if LeBron can't succeed with Gabe Vincent, what chance does Scottie have to succeed with Malachi Flynn and Delano Banton and Davion Mitchell? Like Gabe is a better player than those players, right? Like we can agree on that. Gabe Vincent is a player who started for a championship team, like or championship level team that made it to the finals. Gabe Vincent is considered one of the worst, Jared Vanderbilt. Jared Vanderbilt has elite skill sets. He's an NBA player. He is limited in his offensive abilities. He's limited. Jackson Hayes. Jackson Hayes is the whipping boy for everyone in LA. Oh my God, I can't believe you can't get a better center than Jackson Hayes. Well, let me introduce you to Orlando Robinson, Colin Castleton, Brandon Carlson, Ulrich Chomsky. Let me introduce you to some of the centers that Scottie has played with. No, I think sometimes the media coverage of Scottie in Toronto, being the way it has been, that, oh, they're trying to unearth a championship core to build around this guy, has somewhat neglected to mention how poorly they've built around him to begin with. And I do think there were opportunities. There were opportunities. So yeah, you did give up one of the best forwards in the league in OG Anunoby, who I think was a perfect, compliment to Scottie because he was frustrated with his lack of role, or maybe he didn't want to pay him a max or whatever. This is a very expensive lineup. Kristaps makes 30 million. Derek White makes 30 million. OG makes 40 million. Kyrie makes 40 plus million. This is a go into the luxury tax type of lineup. But this is also a lineup full of players who at one point or another over the last 4 years have been given up on by their team. This is a lineup full of Brandon Ingrams. This is a lineup. And Ingram, the trade for Ingram was so amazing for me, just covering it, was because it's the first time in a while that I felt the Raptors actually capitalized on another team's desperation. It's the first non-brain dead move that they made around Scottie. I mean, I think Jakob Poeltl, like anyone would scoff at that asking price. Like three picks, give up the tank for Jakob Poeltl. I don't think most teams would have done that. You overpaid. Ingram is the first guy where it's like, okay, I see the vision. If this actually works out, you've elevated a lot. And I think most of the people who are picking the Raptors to make the playoffs this year are doing so because of how much Ingram helps Barnes, because of him complementing in exactly the ways that Scottie does not work. What do you need around Scottie? What is it that you specifically need? Let's talk about it. I think you need above the break shooters. So, in a lot of ways, the thought process behind Emmanuel Quickley and Grady Dick is solid. Jacoby can be solid. You need players to take exactly that shot at a really high clip. Why? Well, it's as simple as court geometry. There's only so far that you can stand towards the sideline before you go out of bounds, right? There's a dimension of the court, but the dimension you need to really focus on is 94 feet. Transition and I would call it above the break spacing are the two most critical things to build around a Scottie Barnes. Transition. Which of these players do you feel would be poor in transition? None. Kyrie is wicked in transition, just a great decision maker, great ball handler. OG and Derek White can shoot from just about anywhere, are respected shooters that defenses have to close out on. Scottie now gets the perfect window to attack the rim every single time. And in that ability, the trailer on this play would be who? If the attacker on the wing is Scottie, then the trailer on above the break would be Kristaps, and you can flip it. And Kristaps can also be the guy running down the middle with the basketball. It's just perfect basketball. You can also set the offense with Kristaps starting in the post, or you can use the pick and roll or the pick and dive or the pick and pop with Kristaps Porzingis and Kyrie Irving, in which Scottie Barnes has a perfect off-ball role at the corner. There's ways to do this that are great. There's ways to do this that are easy, but very often when Scottie is attacking the rim, what is it that's missing on this roster? Proper spacing to create that driving angle. Now, if you have a player and you acknowledge that the weakness is that he's not the quickest guy off the dribble, he's not Anthony Edwards or he's not Donovan Mitchell, he's not Michael Jordan, he's not going to just blitz through and cut through defenses like a John Morant or a Derrick Rose. Okay, I got you. Those guys are interesting because they are cheat codes for creating disruptions and rotations. Scottie isn't that. But that doesn't mean that you can't create the space for him to do some version of that or be better at that. You just need a little bit more space. It's just like saying Tyrese Halliburton can be part of a really good defense. Yes, because he participates, he tries, and he commits to the scheme. But you need to put really good defenders around him, right? Like, if you want to play the way Tyrese Halliburton wants to play, which is fast up and down the court, right? If you want to space the court exactly the way the Pacers did, where they have shooters on all sides, you can't have a center who doesn't shoot. They would never trade for Jakob Poeltl, ever. There's not a single center on that roster who can't shoot. They lost Miles Turner. They replaced him with Jay Huff. What do they have in common? They can both shoot, and they can both protect the rim. Do you know why you need a center who protects the rim? You know why they have Miles Turner plus Thomas Bryant? Why did they invest in James Wiseman? They keep investing in the same archetype because it's the archetype that works with Halliburton. That's the problem here. The Raptors were trying to have their cake and eat it too. It's fairly obvious to any average basketball mind what you need in a center next to a Scottie Barnes, what you need in a forward next to a Scottie Barnes, what you need in a guard next to Scottie Barnes. Okay, Scottie Barnes is a phenomenal defender. Phenomenal. Okay. In the lower thirds of your defense, gapping between the paint or the rim and the perimeter, he is a cheat code defensively. He's like Giannis adjacent. Occasionally, he will do impressive things on the ball, like he'll shut down a Paolo Banchero or a, Giannis Antetokounmpo or Kevin Durant or a LeBron James or a Luka Doncic. He'll have like those great moments against those guys, and you might be seduced into thinking he's like some point of attack legend. He's not. He's not, but that doesn't take away from what he can do defensively. And what he can do defensively is he can shut down. He reminds me a little bit of Otto Porter, one of my favorite defenders of all time defensively. He has that ability where away from the basketball and even occasionally on the basketball, he can just shut down entire zones on the court. Now, Ingram is going to help a lot. Ingram's length plus Colin Murray-Boyles. I watched the video by Hoops Reference the other day, and they said the biggest problem is, they were grading every team's worst offseason decision. And they got to the Spurs and they said drafting Carter Bryant. And I was just like ready to turn off the video, but I'm really glad I didn't because it got to the Raptors and they said they didn't do anything. And it's just like, really? They've added Brandon Ingram, who didn't play a game for them last year, which I consider an off-season move that they made just early, pre-agency versus free agency. They added Colin Murray-Boyles and they added Sandro Mamukelashvili. You know what those three players all have in common? They fit very well with Scottie Barnes. Colin Murray-Boyles has, at least defensively, a ton of OG Anunoby in him. A ton. If he can ever shoot, you have recreated OG Anunoby. With the difference being he has a chance to be better than OG because he's a good passer at this stage very early. He's mobile, he's burly, he's strong, he can set screens, he's great off the ball, he has great high basketball IQ. He's awesome. Colin Murray-Boyles is awesome. That's why I wanted to draft Carter Bryant. Carter Bryant is OG Anunoby adjacent. That was one of the biggest stated goals that I made last draft cycle when I was talking about the 9th pick. I said the Raptors need to replace OG Anunoby. Now, I mentioned several players to replace OG since you can't trade for him. I mentioned Cameron Johnson. OG adjacent, nowhere near the defender, but elements of OG, yes. I mentioned Carter Bryant. Again, probably a couple years away from ever achieving that level of success, but certainly has the blueprint to be OG adjacent. Colin Murray-Boyles with a jump shot is OG Anunoby better. a better version of OG. So he may never be a great jump shooter, but if he works at it, maybe. So at least you have one piece there, right? So you need that second physical defender who can bump and trap, right? Again, I mentioned earlier, if you could clone Scottie Barnes last year, you probably have one of the two best defenses in the league. And that's because Scottie does this incredible thing on the perimeter where he's able to chase, trail, disrupt from behind. He's so long, so active, such a great motor. But then also, he has this wonderful ability to disrupt the drive through the pass, right? And he also has a really good ability for a forward or a wing to challenge at the basket. So basically, you need to create three layers of defense, and you need one really good player at all three layers. And the Raptors, for the most part last year, with the exception of the times that Scottie shared the floor with Jakob plus Jonathan Mobo, and you can understand the atrocious spacing that there is, or Davion plus Jakob, which once again, spacing problem offensively. When you have three layers of great defense like this around Scottie, and he gets to be the fourth defender in that three-layer defense. So that's what you would have here with Derek White, pressure perimeter, OG Anunoby, pressure gap, Kristaps Porzingis, clean up the paint, and then you have Scottie as like the fourth defender. I'm not saying the fourth most important defender, but just the fourth good defender in a lineup. This is the type of defense that could challenge, in my opinion, the OKC Thunder for the best defense in the league. This lineup right here, even with Kyrie, who has his own gaps defensively but can participate, could be a great defense. And I think Scottie can be the best defender on a great defensive team. And this is what you need to do it. You need to get guys who understand angles, understand gaps, but also you need to be able to put Scottie in a position where he's not constantly having to be in two places at once. Because again, I made a point, previously, I think he's your best point guard, best shooting guard, best small forward, best power forward, best center. Well, he can't be five players, right? I also think he's probably your best perimeter defender, and I think he's your second best paint defender. So it's just like at some point you need more. You need more than just him. But that's not a knock on him. You know what I mean? Like that's not a knock on him. And this is where I think we need to talk about ceiling raising versus floor raising. So I apologize for dancing all over the place, but I do want to get to this. There was a person who came on to the panel yesterday, D. Lee, shout out to D. Lee, who had created an analytic called Engine. And Engine attempts to understand and quantify how players elevate weak offensive lineups like Colin Castleton, Orlando Robinson. Basically, it gives you plus points for your production and your team's production, negative points for your team's actual strengths without you. And so naturally, players like Nikola Jokic, who had to share the court with weaker offensive players like Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, etc., the Denver Nuggets lineups featured a lot of really bad offensive players. And there's a great value to floor raising because, again, offense gets paid. All these five players on the screen right now are very highly paid players for a reason, because they're two-way players. They are players who can participate on both ends of the basketball. But very often, offense gets more paid than defense. And so the value of a great floor raiser like a LeBron, like a Jokic, is so immense because they can elevate teams that don't have another dominant offensive player to at least competent league average team. LeBron James in his prime, surrounded by 11 Chris Boucher level players, is probably going to make it to the playoffs. Scottie Barnes in his prime, surrounded by 11 Chris Bouchers and Gary Trents, is probably not going to make the playoffs. In fact, he might be like a 20-win team. The gap in ability to floor raise average to below average lineups is huge here. But that doesn't necessarily matter if the job changes a little bit, right? So that's the value of floor raising. But what about ceiling raising? I don't think people value ceiling raising as much. Derek White is a phenomenal ceiling raiser. Phenomenal. He's the type of player that you could add to any contender and almost make them like the favorites. Like any team that you can think of in NBA history that had legit contention. Think about the 19 Sixers that the Raptors faced. If you replace Tobias Harris with Derek White, they win that series. Think about the 2017 Raptors, right? If you replace, let me see from the 2017 Raptors, who would I want to replace here? Not DeBar. You still need his offense. If you could replace Norman Powell with an actualized Derek White, you'd be a contender that year. Like, he single-handedly is such a good ceiling raiser for teams that have a structure already, the teams that have a blueprint and a pathway to scoring baskets. He just makes things so much smoother and so much better because he plugs in all these little gaps. I think Scottie's very Derek White in that way. I'm not comparing them as players. I'm saying in terms of what he does. Scottie Barnes is, it's just like Danny Green. Danny Green on the Bobcats, like that infamous Bobcats team that I think won 7 games. Danny Green on that team might help that team get to 8 wins, 9 wins. He is not single-handedly going to change the outcome of a 7-win team and elevate them. So in that sense, but a Nicholas Batum could. See, Nicholas Batum has more floor-raising ability. Danny Green, who is, in my opinion, a comparable player in terms of impact metrics, is more a ceiling-raising player. And so Scottie is, I think, veers much more into the ceiling raising, much more. He is a player who can, with enough space and enough structure offensively and defensively, be a top 12, top 15 player in the league as soon as, by the way, this year. I think he's there right now. This is not a pipe dream of, well, it could happen in 5 years. No. It could happen in 5 weeks if you have the right structure around him. There are weaknesses, of course. Off the dribble creation on a standstill, it's weaker. But, defenses don't respect him as a shooter. This is something we come across with Amen Thompson, Asar Thompson, Josh Giddey, Scottie Barnes, Ben Simmons. Anytime you can't shoot that well, teams are going to sag off of you. It's going to make your drives a lot harder. Okay. But when he gets to the paint, he finishes well. There are play types designed for him in the post where he can be average to above average. He's a great passer. That's enough. That's enough right there. If I take your dominant play type and I put the players around you that most maximize your ability to function and optimize your efficiency in that play type, Tyrese Halliburton is a great example. Halliburton has a funky jump shot. He needs a lot of space to get that jump shot off. The Pacers didn't look at Halliburton and say, well, he's damaged goods. We need to restructure his jump shot. They said, okay, you need maximum space. Let's speed ourselves up and give you great shooters so you'll have the most space imaginable to work. Scottie Barnes, same thing. There's mechanisms in his jump shot which allow him to be a better pull-up shooter than you think he's going to be. The more space you give him, the more his screening, passing, scoring, driving, shooting, all of it is just going to get better and better. And the problem is people evaluate this guy in the worst condition possible, and they wouldn't necessarily do the same thing with a player like Giannis. When Giannis has Kuzma, who, is massively better offensively than most of the players Scottie played with last year, they say, I can't believe the Bucks are forcing Giannis to play with Kuzma. Giannis is a great floor-raising player. Giannis healthy gets you 35 to 40 wins every year, regardless of what you put around him. He's going to do it this year again. He's going to be a 40-win player, maybe 42 wins. But Scottie isn't that player. And holding him to the standards of a floor raiser and saying, well, you're no good as a basketball player because you can't single-handedly floor raise this half-court offense to average. Pascal Siakam wasn't a floor raiser. Kyle Lowry actually probably was a floor raiser. That's the issue. You needed a ceiling raiser like Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi is a ceiling raiser. Marc Gasol is a ceiling raiser. Danny Green is a ceiling raiser. I think Fred VanVleet, Kyle Lowry, these guys are more floor raising types. It's really hard, even though Fred has tremendous weaknesses, Kyle has tremendous weaknesses, really hard to have one of those two guys running your offense and for you to be like a 20-win team. It's perfectly possible. Perfectly possible. to have Scottie Barnes on a 22-win team. Perfectly possible. He just doesn't have the ability to navigate tight spaces. And so you need to give him the most space. I think this lineup gives him the most space. And I think if you want to be honest, the current roster around him is nowhere near as good as this hypothetical one that I've designed here. Nowhere near as good. But how can we get there? Okay. Pathway forward. Development is key. You're going to need to develop all your young players, and that goes without saying. It will help tremendously if players like who are more considered one-way players right now, Jamal Shed, can maximize himself. What player here gives you Jamal Shed vibes? Nobody. There's nobody this small in my hypothetical roster. But the closest thing that I can think of is maybe a way worse Casey Wallace. They're totally different players, though. So there really isn't a Jamal Shed type on this team. Is there a player who can give you Al Horford-esque stuff? Well, again, you don't have that player on your team. But maybe somewhere between you do have a Jalen Williams type in Sadra Mamukelashvili, though. There are elements to it. He's not a terrible defender. He's a good shooter. He has really strong off-ball tendencies, great basketball IQ, good passer. Yeah, there's elements of Mamukelashvili. So Mamu is not my pick on this team, but he's perfectly fine on the current team. I'm actually working on an analytic, which will probably take a few months. So it's unfortunate that I can't release it before the season, but it's called the SSR, and it's the Scottie Synergy Rankings, in which I use data to optimize a score for every single player in the league in terms of how well they fit with Scottie Barnes. And I think every team, honestly, if they're smart, should do this when they're trying to build around a player. Because there are players who work with Halliburton and there are players who don't work with Halliburton. There's players who work with LeBron and players who don't work with LeBron. And the difference here is just like there were players who worked with Jordan and players who didn't work with Jordan, and everybody knew it, right? People were like, oh man, Scottie Pippen is a perfect teammate for Scott. Yeah. Absolutely. Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Penny Hardaway. Everybody knew the formula to building around Shaquille O'Neal. Everybody knows a formula to building around Giannis. 2019, Giannis got a lot of crap for the wall. Oh my God, the Raptors were able to stop him with the wall. Why? Why were they able to stop him with the wall? Because he had Eric Bledsoe on the fucking court. And if you replace Eric Bledsoe with a really good shooter, I don't think the Raptors come back from that series. Giannis didn't have the mid-range pull-up at that time. He didn't have the great passing ability that he does now. This version of Giannis right now that we're watching, the one that we're watching with Eurobasket for Greece, that version is not stopped by the Raptors wall. You wouldn't be able to stop him today with that same scheme. Impossible. And so it'd be curious to see if the Raptors would get past this version of Giannis, if this version of Giannis was on the 2019 Bucks. But it's up to the Bucks to realize he hasn't learned that stuff yet. So it's the same thing with the Raptors. If you want to build a championship core around Scottie Barnes over the next 5 years, unless you are projecting, and I'm not, for Scottie to become some extremely dynamic, wiggle in tight spaces type of ball handler who can navigate, like Luka Doncic. If Scottie becomes Luka with the basketball, it'll be the most unprecedented growth of a ball handler of all time. Luka is a phenomenal ball handler. Scottie is weak in this regard. But if Scottie can up it to even 60% of Luka, this might work. But unless he does that, you need a player like a Brandon Ingram, Kyrie Irving, players like that to offload some of the pressure of creating offense. Because again, when a Scottie Barnes begins a drive, it doesn't begin quickly enough or dynamic enough. There isn't enough counters that the defense has to massively overreact. And I think this year, with Ingram taking some of that responsibility, and by the way, no, if you're an RJ Barrett fan, an RJ Barrett drive does not force anywhere near the complexity of rotation as a Kyrie Irving drive. I think even the most staunch RJ supporters and Scottie supporters can see that there's lapping levels to how difficult it is to stop a Kyrie Irving drive than it is to stop a Scottie Barnes or RJ Barrett drive. The difference is once Scottie gets to the paint, he's great. Building a team around Scottie is not that dissimilar from building a team around LeBron. It's not that dissimilar from building a team around Anthony Davis, Bam Adebayo, like big forwards, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner. It's not that different. Okay. And sometimes teams just do a really bad job of building around them, right? What did LeBron have when he won championships? He had Kyrie Irving, he had Dwayne Wade, he had those players. He had those players. The only championship he won where he didn't have that type of ball handler on the perimeter was probably the Lakers championship in the bubble. But like all those championship runs that he had, even like the 2007 LeBron, the one that made it to the finals and got walked by the Spurs, he still had Boobie Gibson, who was able to mimic this archetype of player. And I think the Raptors just haven't had that shifty ball handler who just downhill attack. What about a Scottie Barnes? Forget about Kyrie Irving. What if you just had a Darius Garland? Forget about Darius Garland. What if you had a Colin Sexton? Right? Like, again, there is a type of player that works, and then there are types of players that don't. Malachi Flynn doesn't work. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work. Yeah, maybe you don't have Derek White. Can you get Cason Wallace? If you can't get Cason Wallace or Derek White, can you get something like them? Like something of that ilk? Maybe you can't get OG Anunoby. Can you get a Herb Jones? Can we get close? Can we get closer to this archetype? You can't get Kristaps Porzingis. I mean, you could have gotten him because the Celtics were giving him away for free. The Washington Wizards gave him away for free. Fine, you can't get Kristaps Porzingis. Can you get Jay Huff? Can you get someone who can protect the rim and shoot a jump shot at the same time? Like, can you get something along those lines? Now, I'm definitely not saying that the current roster around Scottie is destined to fail. In fact, my projection, which I will definitely talk about in my season preview in a couple of days, which I'm really looking forward to because I'm putting a lot of work into it, a lot of data, a lot of work is going into that season preview. Shout outs to you if you will be able to watch that video. The thing that I would say is this roster, while not exactly achievable, is somewhat replicable if you make the right moves. And I think the Raptors have a couple moves to go. The Ochai Agbaji, Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, Emmanuel Quickly, Brandon Ingram, Colin Murray-Boyles. There's a lot of players that do fit with Scottie. It's not the perfect fit, but there's elements to them that do fit. I think now this year will be about putting Ingram and Barnes together in a way that maximizes both their talents. Ingram defensively helps Barnes because he's long and he sits in the gaps and he's able to maybe just function a little bit like a really bad version of Scottie Barnes so that Scottie Barnes can do what he's good at. You know what I mean? Like maybe you just sit on the weak side. I think offensively, he takes so much pressure off of Barnes so that it allows Barnes to get more into the paint, right? Like an Ingram, Scottie pick and roll can be deadly. There's complications to it, but it can be deadly. With Scottie as the ball handler, Ingram as a screener, it can be super deadly because Ingram can pop and Ingram's huge. So it's not going to be easy. And then Ingram can reset with a drive as well. He's not the most frequent driver, but he's good at it, right? It's so much better than a Barnes Barrett pick and roll. So much harder to stop because Ingram has so many more counters and he's so much better a shooter, right? So the very idea that the Orlando Magic are getting all this praise for adding Desmond Bane, like, oh wow, you finally added shooter and creator to Orlando's completely ass backwards offense. And it's like, didn't the Raptors do something very, very similar with Brandon Ingram? They certainly did. And this Colin Murray-Boyles thing, like, look, Colin Murray-Boyles and Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, these three players are the most important development pieces for the Raptors, in my opinion. Not just because they're the highest picks, not just because they're the 3 first rounders, but because their ability to play two-way will allow you to mimic some of the player types that I'm talking about here. In terms of the biggest hole for the Raptors right now, I think it's pretty obvious. There's 2 major holes on this team, and I wonder if they can use some of their more redundant skill sets and redundant players to fix those holes, because you have a lot of the same thing between Ochai, Grady, Jacoby, RJ. You have a lot of the same stuff there. Can you trade some of that same stuff out for something you don't have? The 2 things you absolutely need right now. 1, a lockdown point of attack defending guard who can actually create some offense. Derek White would be a great opportunity, but if you can't find that player, you might have to draft them. You might have to trade a lot to get them, but it's a valuable archetype. And the second thing is a big who can function the entire court. So again, the closest thing you have to a very well-rounded big right now is Sandro Mamukelashvili, right? You haven't drafted a player who really fits that archetype unless Ulrich takes a step that's unprecedented. But a big who can both function as a drop defender and protect the rim like an Ulrich, has good basketball IQ, so won't get in Scottie's way because very often Scottie's wanting to do something that is pretty complicated, and a player who doesn't have good off-ball awareness and high basketball IQ is simply not going to be able to function in the offense that he wants to play in. So you can't really just be like, okay, well, we want a rim protector who can shoot. Let's go with Precious Achua and Chris Boucher. Yeah, in theory, but they don't necessarily function as well with him as someone like a Kristaps Porzingis. So if you can't get Kristaps Porzingis, I think you need to find a way or an avenue to draft this type of player. And, in terms of players who really fit the bill, there just aren't that many. There just aren't that many players who fit this bill. Maybe if a Donovan Clingan can learn how to shoot, and he started shooting a little bit last year, that'll be a player that develops into this, massive rim presence who can also stretch the court, vertically. Jay Huff was an example of a player that, again, if you don't have Jakob Bertel occupying the center spot, is this the most appealing spot for Jay Huff to come in? Because you're a good team that needs a starting center sometimes, that could help. I'm not saying Mo Wagner and Santi Aldama necessarily like are 100% fits, but they could be something of that sort. This is a very wild one, but not exactly Kristaps Porzingis, but a long defender who can occasionally shoot a little bit would be Jonathan Isaac. I mean, you'd have to really work on that jump shot because it really comes and goes, and maybe that's a terrible idea because Isaac has had some major jump shooting woes. But he'd be a great rim protector next to Scottie. And I think, at the very least, Jonathan Isaac mimics some of what Daniel Gafford can do. So again, like these are archetypes. My view with Scottie is you can absolutely build a championship roster around him, but you need some things. You need good depth. You need great depth. You need good high basketball IQ players. You need certain archetypes, the versatile wing, the point of attack guard, and the rim protector. You need a defensive identity. You need to invest heavily in only defenders who pass the sniff test of 50th percentile defenders. Every single player here on the bench is at least a 50th percentile defender or much better. In the case of Tamani Kamara, Daniel Gafford, Cason Wallace, these guys are like 80th, 90th, 96th percentile defenders. So you need to veer towards defense. And in terms of a starting lineup, you need to be able to create a lot of space, one way or another. Space is not just created by putting 5 shooters out there because the Raptors can easily do that. The Raptors can put up Emmanuel Quickly, Ochai Agbaji, Grady Dick, and Sandro Mamukelashvili. Have you created the correct amount of space that you need for Scottie Barnes? No, because those are just 4 shooters. Those are 4 guys who can shoot. But that's not going to create the space that you need for Scottie Barnes because what you need is space with counters. Imagine the counters here. Scottie Barnes demands a basketball on the post, right? Kyrie Irving feeds it down to him. OG Anunoby comes over, sets the screen for Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving rolls around. Kristaps Porzingis pops, goes from faking a cut to the paint to popping out above the break, replacing where Kyrie was. And now you have all of these players that you can absolutely not ignore. And now you're allowing Scottie to work one-on-one in the post. Worst case, if a defender comes over and tries to double, imagine the options. All the options are smart. All the options are dynamic. And all the options can do more than just catch and shoot. Because Kyrie Irving is not great because he shoots 39% from 3. He's great because he can do 39% from 3 off the move, off the catch, off the dribble. Because he's a player who can start the offense. He's a player who can finish offense. He's a player who can cut without the basketball. Same thing with Derek White. Derek White may not be the greatest creator on earth. He's certainly not, Kyrie Irving, but he's a player who can easily dribble the basketball into the paint and finish a layup. Like he's a player who can navigate a pick and roll. He's a player who can set screens. OG and Derek White make all of this happen, but also the offensive talent level of a Kyrie and a, Kristaps Porzingis, who by some people's estimates are not top 25, top 30 players in the NBA right now. So again, when people often make this lazy analysis of, oh, it's impossible to build a team around Scottie Barnes that can compete for championships, this is a team that will compete for championships. This is a team built around Scottie Barnes. And this is how I would do it. Shout outs to everybody who contributed. Shout outs to our channel members. Shout outs to Red Salute for becoming a new YouTube member. Shout outs to Tetrahedron, WYSO. Shout outs to James. Shout outs to Karen Hall. Shout outs to all of you guys, man. Thank you so much for contributing to my goal, once again, of 100 members by September 16th. I understand it can be a little bit annoying, members only chat and stuff like that. I'm doing it temporarily. I hope you guys understand, and I hope you can bear with me. I do have a big goal. I want to pay off my mortgage. It's important to me. I want to say this, though. This video right here is not the type of video that does very well analytically. In terms of the analytics, Scottie Barnes' big secret is a really quick hitter. It's going to get a lot of views. The Clippers are screwing Kawhi Leonard has 8,000 views. But the gravity of, Jacoby Walter would get 2,000 views. Content creators can often become very skewed by views. Something that performs well consistently can become your go-to, your bread and butter. Something that produces views, revenue, ad revenue can become something that you become seduced by, and then you start creating more and more of that content. And that's why you get the clickbait, the rage bait. That's why you get that stuff, right? That's why it exists. And for me, the members stuff was something that I put off for so long, but the members thing is so great because it's almost paying me to make the content that I actually want to make. It doesn't matter to me that this video only has a few hundred views. It's perfectly fine for me. I don't care that I had to spend 18 hours making a video for only 100 people. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that I was able to create something that I believe was well produced, well made, well researched, well scripted, well put together, well graphicked. And I want to create more and more of this content, man. Like, I started this channel out with a goal, and that was to make content that I was really proud of. And unfortunately, some of the content has been lazy. Like, I'm just being real. Some of the content's very lazy. Some of it's very, like, oh, this thing happened, let's talk about it. That kind of content. And there's a place for that, man. But that's not what I wanted this channel to be. We are 921 videos in. 921 videos is a lot of fucking videos. Some of those videos are 3, 4, 5, 6 hours long. I have put a lot of time into this for the last 4 years. But the truth is, when I really look back on the videos that I'm super proud of, it's the Brian Macon interview. It's the neuroscience video with Catherine McIntosh. It's this video, that's on your screen right now, the 9 levels of basketball IQ. These are the videos that I am very proud of as a basketball creator. And these are the videos that I think further my cause as a basketball creator. So it's important to me to do this type of stuff. It's important for me to make, videos that I don't have to think about, okay, well, how do I package this video so that more people can watch it? Yeah, sure. RJ and Scottie have a beefy history is, our most popular video ever. It's not even one of my 35 to 40 favorite videos on this channel. I don't even like the video. That's just the truth. That's my truth. I don't even care for the video. It's exactly what it was designed to do. It was meant to capitalize on the RJ Barrett trade. It was meant to get a lot of views, and it did, and it got a lot of subscribers. But so what? So what? More views, more subscribers. I don't care. I talk shit about so many channels that have 200, 300,000 subscribers, and they don't create one. They do nothing. They do nothing. They do nothing to advance the game. They do nothing to advance the understanding of the game for their viewers. And for me, these members only videos will be a way to do that, a way to break down analytics. And I don't have to be like the secret truth about analytics. It's not the secret truth about analytics, just talking about analytics. You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be clickbait. So shout outs to all of our members. And yeah, this will be over in September 16th. And I can just go back to, normal chats and stuff. But right now it is very important for me to drive home that this is important. Peace. Talk to y'all later. Enjoy. And to those of you who want to watch one of my favorite games of all time for free with us, join us on Playback tonight at 7 o'clock. We are watching the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Portland Trailblazers, the Western Conference Finals, Game 7. One of my favorite players of all time, Rasheed Wallace. One of my favorite players of all time, Arvydas Sabonis, who I've talked about a lot on this channel and on PC about how great he was, against the birth of a dynasty, Shaq and Kobe. It was a game 7. I think you're going to find out a lot about how good Arvydas was, even 6 years removed from his prime. I think you're going to find out a lot about how awesome Kobe was, at that stage, just coming into his own as a superstar. And yeah, it's an amazing game, and I'm looking forward to it. 7 o'clock. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye bye.